Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our newest episode of Ancient Mathoms, a collaboration between the White Tower blog and Card Talk podcast. I'm Onidsen, ready and waiting to show you the spirit cards for the core set.
And I'm Grant Thompson, just along for the ride.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Walsh, and I am even more just along for the ride on this episode.
We're excited to have you, Dave, as a special guest.
Yeah, this is going to be exciting for me. I've followed it. I just haven't had a chance to record with you guys, so I'm actually really excited to be a part of this. I love that you and Grant took the forefront on this, and it's an exciting project, that's for sure.
All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into the cards. Normally, the way we do this is we'll go over the original version of the card and then just ask ourselves, so what maybe is the problem with this card that makes it just not really used in the modern card text, or maybe what's the problem and why is this card a little too powerful? That doesn't happen very often, but every now and again. So, our first card today, the only ally we're touching from the Spirit Sphere, is the Lorien Guide. The Lorien Guide is a 3-cost spirit ally with 1 willpower, 1 attack, 0 defense, 2 hit points, and the response, after Lorien Guide commits to a quest, place 1 progress token on the active location. So, Grant, what would you say is the problem with this card?
It's too expensive. For what you're getting, it's very expensive. I mean, you're paying 3 for a response that puts 1 progress on the active location. Now, yes, it could be nice to get rid of the location slightly quicker, but in all honesty, I'd save up and pay 1 more for the Northern Tracker.
Yeah, and when I look at this card, I agree that it's expensive, and I feel like that 1 progress token on the active location may or may not be as useful as you think it is when you start playing it. Like, I feel like this is one of those cards as the card pool has grown, that 1 progress on the active location, it's not as effective as it was back when there was only 3 or 4 expansions, so I think that this card has kind of outgrown what it should be, what it kind of should be. It's still an okay card, but it just and the other thing is that it doesn't seem to fit the Sylvan archetype, and that's I think that it needs to fit that Sylvan. Not that it has to, but I think it would be great if you could do that.
Absolutely. I mean, even in the best case scenario, the Lorien Guide's ability is essentially the same as 1 extra willpower.
Yeah, I mean that's really what you're doing, unless the active location just has 1 more progress on it,
Right.
And
Unless
then
you're not actually... It's basically a 2 willpower ally who says, even if you fail the quest, put a progress on the active location, which is
right,
fine, but it's not
right.
3 cost fine.
Right.
Yeah.
So what have we done to it, Grant?
Well, we've given it an enters play ability, a response. After Lorien Guide enters play, choose a player. Each of that player's heroes gets +1 willpower until the end of the round. Now, this works brilliantly if you're playing Sylvans or not, because that +1 willpower you can to any heroes is going to be advantageous if they're going to the quest. More so if you can keep on recurring that throughout the game.
Yeah, and that makes it fit the Sylvan archetype that I am so in love with, that interplay ability. So if you can bring this in and out of play a couple of times when you need that extra boost in questing, that's great. Because I think that response in and of itself, that first response that each hero gets a +1, or the player's hero gets +1, will, that's a kind of a self-limiting restriction, right? Because you may only be questing with 1 of your heroes, but if you know this guy's coming into play, you can I think YOLO questing right then and there.
Absolutely, and that fits really well in the in the sort of context of the Sylvan archetype, the standard Sylvan deck goes what? Celeborn, Galadriel, insert a lore Sylvan hero here.
Thranduil.
Thranduil.
That's true. I guess the
Because
modern deck just
Galadriel
includes Thranduil, but even
Galadriel
so,
gets the lore icon, so it's a little easier because you need the tree people. Well, I guess you don't need the tree people, but this guy's a great target for that. Any of those 3 or 4 cost Sylvans, like you pull back Galleon, you pull back the Neath Guide or something, and pull this guy out. I would be happy with that.
absolutely. Also, having playable 3-cost Sylvans maybe makes that Island Amid Perils event a little better.
Yeah, Island Amid Perils, which I think is one of those that a lot of people poo-poo. I really like the Island Amid Perils, and if I can bring this guy back into my hand using Island Amid Perils, and then lower my threat by 3, and then be able to play this guy again, I think that's really good. Now, I'm not going to ever play this guy usually with Thranduil's ability to bring him in during combat phase,
Sure.
but I think that response is pretty tricky good. Like it gives you a decision to make, that first response where you're deciding, like, do I want to put this guy into play now? Do I, like, if you treat people and he's one of 2 allies on the top 5, like, I think that thematically is just creates a lot more interesting decisions for the player.
I like it. All right, Grant, what is our next card?
Our next card is a 2-cost Spirit Attachment, Unexpected Courage, which is attached to a hero, and with the action Exhaust Unexpected Courage to ready attached hero. Now, this card is very overpowered, to the point where you put 3 of these on a defender or an attacker, and you can attack or defend 2 or 3 times in a round. So, I like this card, as many players do, but I think it needs a little bit of a nerf. So, what have we done to nerf it?
Well, we've gone with a very light touch, and we've just made it limit 1 per hero. So you still put it on the person who you want the extra actions out of. It's no different than it's ever been, except for now you can't use it to get 4 actions out of the same hero if you put all 3 copies on it.
Right.
And I think thematically that makes a little more sense, right? Like if you're thinking about heroes, bounding through Mirkwood or fight, like the unexpected courageousness of a hero, like it happens once, and that's pretty cool, right? Like, hey, I'm done, and I can attack a second time because of this. But then, to do it 3 or 4 times in a turn, I get it. Gameplay wise, that is fine. That's not, but thematically thinking about what a hero has when they have some unexpected courage, it just seems, that limitation seems reasonable to me for at least thematic wise. I'm sure that, limit 1 per hero would make a whole bunch of players really mad, including myself, when I'm playing like a Spirit Dine blocks the world deck,
Fair point there. Fair point there. One of the things that we wanted to do, though, was to open up space so that when we take on a little bit later in the project, boosting some of our other readying attachments, that people don't ask, well, why don't you just want to play Unexpected Courage? Which kind of really is the question, like something like Steed of the Mark or Spare Hood and Cloak or even Cram, even though it's out of Sphere. A lot of times you put that in your deck and somebody asks the question, well, why don't you just use Unexpected Courage? And
well, that's the thing, is that this opens up a little more design space for using those cards and causes people to really think, hey, what are some other options to readying, that I may have. So I just looked on RingsDB, and RingsDB, this card is in 5,700 decks. That's over half the decks on RingsDB that uses Unexpected Courage. And so while that doesn't necessarily indicate that the card is broken, it definitely indicates that a ton of people are using this card over other readying effects.
And our hope is that by the end of this series, a lot of these other readying effects will be, well, maybe not comparable to Unexpected Courage, but people have reasons in at least some decks to say, well, yeah, no, I'm using these cards instead of Unexpected Courage because they just work better here.
Yeah.
I think that's all I've got to say on this card.
Yeah.
Dave, you want to read us Power in the Earth?
Yeah, so the original or the new one?
The original. Let's go with the original.
Okay, so the original one is a one cost spirit, obviously, attachment. It's a condition, and you attach to a location, and the attached location gets -1 threat. And recently, Power in the Earth became a little more playable with the Haldan archetype. As written. So,
right.
So I think that's interesting that we're revisiting this card, even now that it's seeing a little more play.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's seeing a whole lot of play even with Haldan, but it's definitely seeing more than it has done in a lot of years.
Yeah, you may not want to couple Haldan, who's a lore hero, with the spirit sphere, but it's still definitely a little bit of an option there.
Yeah. I didn't really care much for Power in the Earth because, generally speaking, you're getting the higher threat locations out when you're playing. You're not really letting them sit around and build up. The only times I can think you're doing that, especially early on in the core set, is probably the Enchanted Stream, which stops you from drawing cards when it's the active location. So nullifying a threat point on that, I can see why, but generally speaking, I never really played with this in my deck.
Well, and that's the whole point of this project, right? Is that you take cards that aren't typically played and you try to figure out if there's a way to kind of, buff or nerf them a little bit. That I guess we wouldn't nerf a card that nobody plays, but that's the reason that this project exists, is because Power in the Earth is kind of an underused, underplayed card, and let's figure out a way to make it reasonable in the current card pool.
Definitely.
So at the moment, it's the equivalent of one cost for the equivalent of one willpower, let's say.
Yeah, it's pseudo-questing, right? You're pseudo-questing for one with this. And the updated, do you want me to do the updated version?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's talk about the updated version.
Yeah, so the updated version keeps the cost and the condition attachment, and you put it on a location still. And now, instead of just reducing it by 1 willpower, now we're dealing with 2 willpower. Now it reduces the location by 2 threat. And I think that that's a great, especially for the core set, I think that that's a great, interesting change.
Yeah, even in just the core set thinking, just toss it on a Necromancer's Pass that has a nasty travel effect that you don't want to do. And it'll bring it down to a single threat, and you can pretty much quest over that for the rest of the game. Put it on an Enchanted Stream, and now you forget it for forever.
Well, and that's why I like it, is because it gives the player another exciting option to do. So one, like Grant said, it kind of makes it, but 2 really highlights, okay, here's a really decent decision that I have to make, is do I want to nullify an Enchanted Stream, or do I not want to go to a Necromancer's Pass, or, like now there's some decisions that the people have to make, the players have to make, and I think that that's really good. And you know what? It's because I'm going to be talking about theme. I like the idea that the Power in the Earth has a little more oomph and chops behind it than just 1 threat. It has a 2 threat oomph behind it.
I think that too. Oh, go ahead, Grant.
I think it's more viable now than what it's been, with that, just even that slight little increase, and more people are probably going to be more likely to play it because of that, rather than just letting it sit in the binder. Even in a Haldan deck, it gives you that extra oomph so that you can load up a location, leave it there, and then play either south away to negate its travel effect, or just right, that's that there. We don't need to worry. When it does get explored via other means, Haldan can allow you to draw a card.
Absolutely. One thing that I like about this is it also maybe gives a little space to an alternate Haldan archetype, because right now with the Haldan deck it seems like you want to load up all your attachments on a single location, right? To get the maximum benefit from south away, to get the maximum cost reduction off the Mirkwood Hunter, and to get the maximum card draw off Haldan when you clear it.
Yeah.
But the designers released a few cards that feel like they want you. Those cards want a deck where you put location attachments on a lot of different locations, like the familiar lands card, which is a one-cost lore event. When you play it, it reduces every location with an attachment on it. It reduces the threat by 2.
Right. It's kind of like the next alternate version of a location control. So instead of having, tower locations, now you have, locations spread around with
Exactly.
one or two attachments on it.
And I think this whole idea of spreading locations around is a good idea, because obviously they've introduced one per location for like the Woodsman's Clearing, and there's a couple of others that are limited one per location, and I think it's a good idea for the pseudo questing, or in other words, the location control, to just, instead of just diversifying it in one direction, diversifying it in a whole other way.
Yeah, and I think that this also opens up space, because now if you put 2 on one location, that's 4 threat you're mitigating each turn, which, that's, I mean, a lot of locations have 4 threat or less. So I think that makes it, an even more interesting decision. And let's be honest, this is in essence a spirit version of Asphalov, right? It's a one-shot Asphalov. It doesn't get rid of the location, but it definitely reduces the threat by 2. So I think that there's something to be said for that.
It's also a decent version of secret paths that cancels the threat of a location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you think, well, do I want to cancel it, or do I want to negate it for a turn? Which do I think is more viable?
Absolutely. Well, I don't think I have anything else to say about this one.
No. I mean, we could talk these to death, I guess, but we'll never get done with the show. So, yeah, let's move on.
Forging onward, the next card on our list is Favor of the Lady. It's a 2-cost spirit attachment, condition attachment. Attached to a hero, the attached hero gets +1 willpower. Grant or Dave, would you ever play this in a deck?
I think at the very beginning, I thought that this was a really good card. When I just had the core set and maybe a couple APs, I thought that I liked this. But very soon, this card you can boost willpower so many other ways. And even within Sphere, you have Eowyn, who you can just pitch. You could pitch this card to Eowyn, not have to pay anything, and still get the +1 bonus. So, so I think that, this card is good on Eowyn, but it's not as good as a lot of the more recent cards that boost threat or boost willpower.
Right. Well, I have used this in a current deck. One of my versions of Done Here Duck Shoot actually puts this on Fastred, so that when he's got the golden shield, he's actually defending for 5 rather than 4.
Yeah, and I mean that's the kind of shenanigans I think that this card helps with. That whole I'm gonna use my willpower to defend, the golden shield thing, like you said, or
So for full disclosure, I actually have run this in one of my decks also, and it was the same thing. I was using Leadership Aylmer, and he had Herogrim, which lets you add your willpower to your attack.
Yeah. I mean,
right.
The only downside of it is its cost being 2.
Yeah, it's still 2 cost for 1 willpower. If you can find a way to use your willpower to do something else, it's 2 cost for, in your faster deck, 1 willpower and 1 defense, or in my Aylmer deck, 1 willpower and 1 attack, and that's a little easier to swallow.
Yeah,
but it's still not great.
Exactly.
And I think that is always the big downside, is you're paying 2, and especially in the core set, think of all the attachments or events that cost 2 to play. You can sneak attack for 1 and sneak attack almost anything out and quest with it for 1 willpower, and then this, I get it that this is a permanent, this is always there, but like it's also about how you're going to spend your resources.
Exactly.
You can't look at it in a vacuum. And so a lot of times when you have this in your hand and you have other cards that cost 2 or less, it's always those other cards that are getting played. Unless you specifically, like you guys said, have a deck where you just want to keep buffing the willpower.
So what have we done to it, Grant?
We're giving it a response. So after an encounter card with Surge is revealed, add Favor the Lady to the victory display. To discard the next encounter card revealed without resolving its effects.
Can I just tell you, I think that's brilliant. Seeing all the cards that you guys have put together and kind of seeing a little bit of the behind the scenes stuff, this is one of my favorite upgrades because of the decision, the choice you have to make. Plus, I think if there is one woman in Middle Earth that is totally, bad A, that's Galadriel, and for her to be able to cancel a surge effect, and as her favor, I think that's amazing. And so it gives the player more choice. And anytime the player has to make a decision, especially like this where you have to get rid of the whole card, like that's wild. I really like, this is one of my favorite upgrades, and I think it's not OP. It's just about right.
Yeah, I kind of compare it with the Minas Tirith Lamplight from later on in the card pool, but this one does it so much better.
Well, I think that sounds like we found a card that's going to need to get a little bit of help when we get there. Yeah.
Now this just makes, with the reforged card, this ends up being crazy, in terms of being able to cancel surge effects.
It goes to the victory display, David, so you kind of bring it back where we throw.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
That actually was a rather deliberate decision. We looked at it and we're like, this could be
totally.
really powerful if you could do it over and over again. So we decided to send it to the victory display where it means it's a one and done each copy you play. It also has the nice, helpful side effect of boosting Rossio decks, though.
Yeah.
Or at least
Right.
victory display decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. But you repeat yourself. Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those. I think the card is great. The updated version is great.
All right. I don't have much to say other than what we've already said. This is one of the ones that I was really excited about. I really, really enjoyed it.
Okay, the next card we have is the 2-cost event, A Light in the Dark. Action, choose an enemy, engage with the player, and return that enemy to the staging area. So, thoughts?
It's not an awful card. It's just an expensive card, and you don't get quite enough out of it to justify spending your 2 resources on it. Especially in Spirit, where it can be difficult to get resources.
Yeah, I agree. And at the time when this was released, it paired really well with Dunhir in the Spirit archetype because it didn't really have many defenders or high attackers, so it worked well, but it was such a drain on resources.
And the funny thing is that pushing things back to the staging area archetype really didn't get developed until later on in the game. So really it was done here for a while, and then Haldir came out, and I feel like that whole archetype was really struggling at the very beginnings of the game, and and now you have a 2-cost card that pushes something back into the staging area. Okay, that's. But for what? And so this card doesn't get played because the archetype wasn't developed. And now you have, Grant's famous Dunhir Duckshoot deck, and this card, you reduce the cost by 1 from 2 to 1, and then all of a sudden, you have something that's playable.
Well, and that's exactly what we've done. We've just dropped the cost to 1, and now you could almost think of it as the Spirit version of Feint, right? Have an enemy who's about to attack, you send him back to the staging area so he doesn't attack you.
Yeah, so let me ask a question as somebody who wasn't on the inside of all the development. Was it specifically decided on about whether that was just going to stay in action, or whether it would go to a combat action, or whether it could be an engagement action or something like that.
I think we just left it as an action. We didn't really talk about like when it should be played. It's just something like choose an enemy engaged with a player, so you could do that in your planning phase if you've got one already engaged with you. So if you've got ranger spikes or poison stakes and you've got, say, a Mumak engaged with you, you can play this and just put on the poison stakes.
Right, because this works in the trap deck, obviously, but
Sure. Maybe not a Mumak because I can't have attachments, but the principle is sound.
Yeah.
It also, as Grant said, we didn't specifically discuss it, but I like leaving it more flexible. That because the staging area attack has got a couple different ways to do it. You've got Dunhere who just normally does attacks, but you've also got Leadership Aomer who attacks into the staging area when you're questing. And so I like the idea of having an event that lets you push an enemy already engaged with you back for Aomer to attack it during the quest phase.
So a little the tactics event, Hands Upon a Bow,
or that.
So a little gameplay aside, rules thing. Like, does this make sense to push back into the staging area after shadow cards have been dealt, so that way you have one less, shadow card to worry about?
Well, yeah, absolutely.
In terms of playing, either version of the action is the same no matter what. But if you're playing a Light in the Dark, and you're going to do it during the combat phase, do it, after shadow cards have been dealt, but before the attack results, because you have action windows all in there.
And it makes a great idea for when you're in the Airs of Numenor, where you've got those crazy shadow chains that you've got. Those the goblin scavengers or whatever they are.
Goodness gracious.
Like +2 for each shadow card dealt of them. Or the goblin orc arsonists that get 2 shadow cards. There you go, Light in the Dark, back to the staging area before you go on your crazy chain.
Absolutely. Now, it should be noted that you can't actually use this card to cancel a shadow effect. Once you've started the attack and seen what it is, that attack will resolve whether or not you push them back to the staging area.
Yeah. Right. You can, can't you deal shadow cards and then don't you have an action window to push them back to the staging area?
Absolutely. There is an action window before they start attacking in which you can play this and just avoid the attack. Right.
I'm no rules guru. That's why I brought that up. So that was, and that's valid, again, because the only thing that changed about the card was its cost. So, you can do that now. This card just doesn't see a lot of playing time because of all those things we said, it's over, because of the one thing you said, it's overcosted.
All right. So moving on to the next card, Strength of Will.
Yep.
David, you want to read that one for us?
Sure. The original Strength of Will is a 0-cost spirit event, and it has a response that after you travel to a location, exhaust a spirit character and place 2 progress tokens on that location. Not a horrible card to begin with, but you guys decided to buff that a little bit. Actually, I would suggest that you buffed it a lot by changing the response that after you travel to a location, exhaust a spirit character, place 3 progress tokens on that location, and then if that progress explores the location, you get to draw a card. So I would guess you're never going to play this card except when you explore the location, so that you can get card draw for free. I guess it does again create a situation for more decisions that the player has to make, because maybe you have a 7. What's the one in the Dwarduff cycle, the 7 branching paths or something, where you have 7 you have to put 7 progress on a location. Like, this would help it.
That's Goblin Tunnels.
Oh yeah, Goblin Tunnels. But I think that this is the one where I feel like it may be a little too powerful for what you've done, but that's my opinion.
Well, what do you think, Grant?
I like it. I didn't really use Strength of Will all that much to begin with, because exhausting a spirit character, I was generally questing with most of mine, if not all of them, that weren't either attacking or defending. So it's always a card that I've felt that's out of place for just 2 progress on a location. Well, 2 progress on a location you've just travelled to, when I know that generally you're going to clear that location next turn. Now, buffing it slightly by giving it that card draw ability might make it into more of my decks because of the fact that it gives Spirit access to card draw.
And even with 3 progress tokens, you're still not going to be clearing a great many of the locations in the game.
No.
Well, I don't know how many. I think that this may be the only card that puts 3 progress tokens on something. I think most cards only put 1 or 2 on it. So
well,
for
it depends. If you've got the Bjorn and Guardian, you kill an enemy with 6 threat.
okay, yeah, okay.
The other options that do just 3, that can get up to 3 or more progress on a single location would be Ride to Ruin, which requires you to discard a Rohan character. And then the other one is the Evening Star.
Oh, right, because you get to put 2 on a location for every copy.
Right. So still, this is much cheaper than the Evening Star, but exhausting a spirit character is sometimes harder to come up with than 2 lore resources.
Yeah.
And when you compare it to Ride to Ruin, exhausting a character is certainly an easier cost to pay than discarding a Rohan character, but the limitation is that you can only put it on a location you just traveled to, so it doesn't actually let you clear a location in the staging area.
Well, if you bring out the Sylvan Guide, the new Sylvan Guide, and then you bring this card out, like, I mean, it's quite possible that you're going to clear. I mean, you're clearing out a 4. A 4. What am I trying to say? A 4 progress location, in the turn that it's made active.
Sure.
Actually, you won't be able to do it, right? Because you travel after you quest. So the Sylvan is still.
So you'd have to have, if you want to clear out some of those higher quest points, you'll have to have other forms of location control already in play.
Yeah.
Like some Asphaleth or ancestral knowledge from the dwarves. There's a whole host of others that are there. Northern Tracker.
Yep.
That have already placed progress on them after before you've travelled. Then you travel to it. Then you can use this and clear that location.
So, still takes a lot of moving parts to become a guaranteed card draw, which is the way I think we wanted it. We didn't want it to become, just toss it in every deck because it's an extra card now.
Well, I think in the decks you're going to be playing this card in, it is a guaranteed card draw.
Sure.
Like you're going to play it in a deck that has Asphaleth in it because it's in Sphere. Not that Asphaleth. You're playing Spirit, Glorfindel probably, and Asphaleth.
Right.
So.
Well, moving on to the last card on our list, Will of the West. This is kind of a weird one, and I'll take it because I take full responsibility for what we've got here. It's an action, choose a player, shuffle that player's discard pile back into his deck, and Octagon hasn't had the image updated apparently for the errata. The errata card says, then remove Will of the West from the game.
Right.
And this is just me getting up on a little bit of soapbox, but that always felt a little bit clumsy to me as a way to get rid of the card, especially when we already had a part of the game that we send cards to, that being the victory display. So my only change is I made it a victory display card instead of remove it from the game. And that's just me feeling streamlined mechanics, etc., etc.
I mean, the only thing I can think of that the designers have said remove from the game rather than add to the victory display is because of the cards that can be pulled out of the victory display, although there are no player cards that can do that at this moment. But there are some treacheries in events and enemies, treacheries, enemies, and what have you that can be pulled out of the victory display in later quests.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why it's removed from the game, because removed from the game is removed from the game is removed from the game. It's not victory display, which is still part of a play area. It's still considered out of play, but it's there's
Something
still
that-
cards that can interact with it. So now you're bringing it back into something that can hit design space, so so if Caldara ever, or right, like the dwarven mining mechanic, like all of those reasons why you'd want Will of the West in your deck. If there was ever a card that manipulated the victory display, this card immediately gets put back in there. Having said that, I actually agree with you, Samuel, that this card, I think putting it in the victory display makes sense from the design consistency standpoint.
Yeah, I think putting it in the victory display, I agree with both of you. It should be put in the victory display. As I say, at the moment, there is no cards that can manipulate the player cards in the victory display to pull them out. Yes, you've got things like Keena's Lances that gets a boost when you've got zero cost, cards in the victory display with no cost on them. But in all honesty, that's neither here nor there, because by the time you're getting round to that point, you've already got 3 or 4 cards in the victory display. What's one more?
And I think anything that can help Rossiel out with her, is Rossiel a her or him? It only just struck me now that, anyways, but anytime you can help Rossiel's ability, I think that helps with
Rossiel's ability's enemy or location boosted.
Okay.
Not boosted by player card.
So this helps the Rossiel deck kind of tangentially, or kind of a second hand. What it does is boost Keena's Lances.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the really big reason you run a victory display deck. And then if you're running Rossiel in that deck, it doesn't help activate her boosts specifically, but it does get Keena's Lances running better, which is part of that major engine.
Yeah.
So, and that's all the cards for today. I do want to address right now one card that isn't on this list, the Northern Tracker. It's a very, very powerful card, and we have originally talked about the idea of toning it down a little bit, but after further reflection and gathering response from the community, the general consensus is that while Northern Tracker is very, very powerful, it's not overpowered and it doesn't warp design space. So I just wanted to bring that up, just to note that we are not actually changing the Northern Tracker.
I mean, if we're talking about cards that aren't also on the list that are notable, it's also the Test of Will. Test of Will is maybe one of the most powerful cards in the game and really restricts the designer's design space. But, what can you do?
Yeah, in that case, it's been restricted so much that there's hardly anything else that lets you deal with treacheries. If we had a bunch of treachery-canceling cards that were just not getting played because Test of Will was too good, we'd have eroded Test of Will, but at the moment, eroding or nerfing Test of Will basically just means that people are just left with a more expensive Test of Will.
Right.
Yeah, same with hasty stroke.
Yes.
I mean, it's just interesting because you want to know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Is there not any cards that cancel when revealed effects because of Test of Will, or is Test of Will, which one came first?
Right.
Well, the only one that I can think of is Eleanor, off the top of my head.
Right. Eleanor, the Halfling Bounder, and then there's also a couple cards that do it by alternate means. That would be things like the door is closed.
Yeah.
Or Out of the Wild, which lets you just remove the treachery from the game. But for actually canceling the when revealed effect on a treachery, it's just Eleanor and the Halfling Bounder, other than Test of Will.
Yeah, and they've got their own conditions. Halfling Bounder needs to have a side quest in the victory display, and Eleanor just basically replaces the card. So,
Yep. So we ended up not touching Test of Will either, just for the fact that there's nothing out there that could fill in the space.
Right.
yeah.
And that makes sense too.
So thanks for watching, and thank you, Grant and David, for coming on and talking about these cards with me. And until next time, happy questing.